Hello, everyone. Welcome back to today's story. In this episode, Diep, after enduring countless doubts and silent rejections, makes a brave decision to confront Mr. Sun, James's father, face to face. This is not a meeting filled with arguments or accusations, but one driven by sincerity, responsibility, and the courage to stand for true love. As old beliefs are challenged and buried emotions resurface, one honest conversation begins to change everything. Will Mr. Sun finally see Diep for who she truly is, not as an obstacle, but as the woman his son chose with conviction? Stay with us until the end to witness how understanding replaces opposition. And don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to us. The evening air feels heavier than usual as Diep stands outside Mr. Sun's house, her palms damp with nervous sweat. This is not the first time she has faced him, but tonight is different. Tonight, she is not here to beg, to explain, or to quietly accept rejection. Tonight, she is here to speak from her heart. Inside the house, the lights are bright but cold. Mr. Sun sits in his familiar chair, posture straight, expression controlled. He doesn't invite Diep to sit. He doesn't offer tea. The silence stretches between them, thick with unspoken history, years of disapproval, distance, and silent resistance. Diep takes a slow breath. She bows politely, just enough to show respect, but not submission. "Uncle Sun," she begins, her voice calm but steady. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." Mr. Sun studies her carefully. In his eyes, Diep is still the same girl from a poor background, the woman he believes has complicated his son's future. Yet something about her posture tonight feels different. She stands straighter. Her gaze doesn't waver. "I didn't call you here for pleasantries," Mr. Sun says coolly. "Say what you need to say." Diep nods. She expected this. "I know you've never approved of my relationship with James," she says. "I know you think I'm not good enough for him. And honestly, I understand why you think that." Mr. Sun raises an eyebrow slightly, surprised by her openness. "I come from nothing," Diep continues. "I don't have money, power, or a family name that carries weight. I can't offer James an easy life. But what I can offer him is honesty, loyalty, and a heart that never once treated him as a tool or a stepping stone." She pauses, choosing her words carefully. "I love James, not because of his family, his status, or his future," she says. "I love him because of who he is when he's stripped of all that. The man who worries about others before himself. The man who doesn't walk away when things get hard." Mr. Sun leans back slightly, crossing his arms. He doesn't interrupt, but his face remains unreadable. Diep takes another breath. "When James was abroad," she says softly, "I saw how much pain he was carrying. He never blamed you. He never complained. He just kept asking himself how to be a better son and a better man at the same time. I watched him struggle every single day." Her voice trembles for the first time, but she doesn't stop. "I know you want the best for him," Diep says. "Any father would. And I know you're afraid I'll hold him back, that I'll make his life harder." She looks directly at Mr. Sun now, her eyes clear. "But Uncle Sun, please believe me when I say this. I have never once stood in his way. Every decision James has made, he made because he wanted to. And if one day he chooses a path that doesn't include me, I will respect that. I will never trap him with guilt or sacrifice. That sentence lands heavier than anything else she said so far. Mr. Sun's fingers tighten slightly on the armrest. Diep continues, her voice gaining strength. I'm not asking you to choose me over your plans for James, she says. I'm asking you to see me as a human being, as someone who truly wants to build a life with him, not take anything away. She reaches into her bag and slowly places a small folder on the table between them. These are my work records, Diep explains. My income, my savings, my plans. I know it's not impressive compared to what your family has, but every number here was earned honestly. I didn't rely on James. I didn't use his name. I built everything with my own hands. Mr. Sun glances down at the folder, but doesn't open it. I don't need your money, Diep adds quickly. I don't want it either. I just want you to know that I'm not irresponsible. I'm not reckless, and I'm not someone who will drag your son into uncertainty without being prepared. The room grows quiet again. Diep hesitates for a brief moment, then says the words she has been holding back all night. If James and I get married, she says, I promise you this. I will respect you as his father for the rest of my life. I will never turn him against you. I will never stand between him and his family. Even if you never accept me fully, I will still teach my children to respect you. That finally makes Mr. Sun look up sharply. Children, he repeats. Diep nods. Yes. Because when I imagine the future, I don't just see love. I see responsibility. I see a family that stands together even when we don't agree. For the first time, Mr. Sun's expression shifts, not to anger, but to something more complex. He studies Diep again, this time not as an obstacle, but as a person. You speak well, he says slowly, but words are easy. I know, Diep replies without hesitation. That's why I'm not asking you to believe me tonight. I'm only asking you to judge me by my actions, from the beginning until now. She lowers her head slightly. If after all that, you still believe I'm unworthy of James, she says quietly, I will accept your decision. But I needed you to hear the truth from me. Not rumors, not assumptions. Diep straightens and waits. Seconds pass, then minutes. The silence stretches longer than before, but this time, Diep doesn't feel crushed by it. She feels calm, because she has finally said everything she needed to say. Mr. Sun exhales slowly. He looks away, toward the window, as if searching through memories. When he speaks again, his voice is lower, less sharp. You remind me of someone, he says. Someone who also stood in this room years ago, refusing to back down. Diep doesn't ask who. I've spent my life believing strength comes from control, Mr. Sun continues. From planning everything in advance. But James, he's never followed my plans the way I expected. He turns back to Diep, and yet, he admits reluctantly, he has never been more determined than since he chose you. The words hang in the air, heavy with meaning. Mr. Sun falls silent again, deep in thought, while Diep waits, heart racing, unsure whether this pause signals rejection or the beginning of something she never dared to hope for. The silence inside the room grows heavier with every passing second. Mr. Sun stands by the window, his back facing Diep, shoulders squared as if he's still bracing himself for another confrontation. Outside, the city glows faintly under the night sky. Neon lights reflecting off glass buildings like distant, unreachable stars. Diep remains where she is, hands gently clasped in front of her, breathing slowly. She understands now. This moment is no longer about defending herself. It's about whether the wall in front of her will finally crack. Mr. Sun speaks without turning around. "When I was young," he says quietly, "I believed emotions were weaknesses. Love, hesitation, doubt. They were things that could destroy a man's future if he let them control him." Diep listens intently, surprised by the shift in tone. "I came from nothing," Mr. Sun continues. "No connections, no safety net. I clawed my way up, step by step. Every decision I made was calculated. Every relationship served a purpose." He pauses, as if weighing his own memories. "When I married James's mother, it wasn't romance," he admits. "It was stability, compatibility, something logical. That's how I've lived my entire life." Slowly, he turns to face Diep. "That's why I couldn't understand you," he says plainly. "I looked at you and saw unpredictability, risk, a future I couldn't control for my son." Diep meets his gaze without flinching. "But the more I tried to separate James from you," Mr. Sun continues, "the more I realized something was wrong with my thinking." He walks back toward his desk, but instead of sitting immediately, he rests his hands on its surface. "James has always respected me," he says. "Even when he disagreed, he never raised his voice, never disobeyed outright. But when it came to you, he changed." Diep's heart tightens. "He stopped asking for permission," Mr. Sun says. "He started informing me of his decisions. Not rebelliously, calmly, as if he had finally accepted that his life belonged to him." Mr. Sun exhales slowly. "That terrified me," he admits, "because for the first time, I realized I could lose him, not to failure, not to weakness, but to his own strength." Diep remains silent, allowing him to continue. "I told myself you were influencing him," Mr. Sun says. "That you were filling his head with ideas of sacrifice and defiance. But tonight, I see I was wrong." He straightens, his gaze sharper now, but not hostile. "You didn't teach him to oppose me," he says. "You taught him to stand firm." Those words strike Diep deeply. "For a long time," Mr. Sun goes on, "I thought love was something that made people careless. But I've watched James endure pressure, isolation, and uncertainty because of you. And instead of breaking, he became more disciplined, more focused, more willing to take responsibility." He finally sits down. "I sent him abroad thinking distance would solve everything," Mr. Sun admits. "I thought time would erase feelings, but instead, it exposed something I couldn't ignore." He looks at Diep directly. "My son never once blamed you for the pain he endured." Diep's eyes glisten, but she keeps her posture steady. "He blamed himself," Mr. Sun continues, "for not protecting you enough, for not being strong enough to stand up sooner." Mr. Sun's jaw tightens slightly. "No father wants to admit this," he says quietly. "But I was the one hurting my son." The room falls silent again, this time softer, heavier with truth rather than tension. Diep finally speaks. "I never wanted James to choose between you and me," she says gently. "I wanted him to have both, a family and a future built on honesty. Mr. Sun nods faintly. That's what convinced me, he says. You never tried to isolate him. You never turned him against his parents. Even when I treated you unfairly, you still spoke of me with restraint. He pauses. That restraint is not weakness, he adds. It's discipline. Mr. Sun reaches for a glass of water, taking a slow sip before continuing. I've spent years judging people by what they can offer materially, he says. Tonight, I watched you stand in front of me with nothing but your conviction. No threats, no manipulation, no desperation. He sets the glass down. You didn't ask me to change my values, he says. You simply asked me to look at you clearly. Diep lowers her gaze briefly, overwhelmed. For the first time, Mr. Sun admits, I asked myself a question I've avoided for years. He looks at her again. If someone like you were my daughter, would I be proud? The question hangs in the air. Mr. Sun doesn't wait for an answer. I would, he says quietly. Diep inhales sharply, emotion rising in her chest. I won't pretend my concerns are gone, Mr. Sun continues. Marriage is not a fairy tale. You and James will face pressure. From my family, from society, from expectations you can't escape. He leans back slightly. But I now believe this, he says firmly. You will not run when things get difficult, and James will not abandon responsibility when comfort disappears. He sits upright, voice steady and resolute. If James chooses to marry you, Mr. Sun declares, I will no longer oppose it. Diep's breath catches. I will not interfere, he continues. I will not manipulate circumstances to separate you, and I will not force him to choose between loyalty and love again. Diep bows deeply, her emotions finally spilling over. Thank you, she says softly. I promise I will never take this lightly. Mr. Sun raises a hand, signaling her to stand. This is not a favor, he says. It's an acknowledgement. He pauses, then adds something Diep never expected. When you decide on a wedding date, Mr. Sun says, inform me. Diep looks up in surprise. I will attend, he says simply, not as an obstacle, but as James's father. Tears slip down Diep's cheeks, but she doesn't wipe them away. I will respect your family, she says sincerely, no matter how difficult it becomes. Mr. Sun nods once. That's all I ask, he replies. As Diep steps out of the house, the cool night air wraps around her like a release. The city noise feels distant, muted. She walks slowly, letting the reality settle in. Years of fear, doubt, and rejection begin to loosen their grip. She stops under a streetlight and takes out her phone. James answers almost immediately. Diep? His voice is tense. I've been calling. Are you okay? She smiles through tears. I'm okay, she says softly. More than okay. What happened? He asks, barely breathing. Diep looks up at the night sky. Your father listened, she says. He really listened. There's a pause. Does that mean... James starts. Yes, Diep answers gently. He won't stop us anymore. James exhales shakily, a sound filled with relief he's held back for far too long. I don't know what you did, he says, but thank you. I didn't fight him, Diep replies. I showed him who we are. James is silent for a moment, then says firmly, I'm coming home. Diep's heart swells. This time, James continues, I'm not running. I'm standing beside you. Diep ends the call and continues walking. her steps lighter than before. The future remains uncertain, but for the first time, it feels shared.